You threw me out at 15, I said, staring across the polished conference table while my mother's nails tapped against a folder marked Estate of Alina Vale. Now you're calling yourself her grieving daughter? My father leaned forward first, jaw locked, voice low and dangerous. Watch how you speak to your mother. The probate attorney didn't even look up from his notes. Mr. Mercer, one more interruption and I end this meeting. My mother laughed without humor. Mascara perfect? Grief fake. Ended after you explain how a girl we fed, clothed, and tolerated somehow convinced my mother to leave her everything. That word hit harder than a slap. Tolerated, I almost answered. Then the attorney turned his laptop around and said, Before anyone says another word, Mrs. Vale recorded this 3 months before she died. I think the deceased would like to respond herself. If you've ever been cast out by your own blood, stay with me and tell me where you would have drawn the line. My name is Ivy Mercer. I'm 21 years old. I rebuild diesel engines for charter boats on the Gulf Coast. And the last person who ever loved me without calculation died on a Tuesday at 4:12 inches the morning, with her hand wrapped around 2 of my fingers. Her name was Eleanor Vale, though everyone in Bayhaven called her Miss Ellie, even men old enough to be her classmates. She owned a weather-beaten white house 2 streets from the marina, a bait shop she turned into a parts counter when the fishing business changed, and a spine so straight that bad people always felt judged around her even when she was smiling. She was my grandmother. Not the soft, blurry kind people talk about in holiday ads. She was sharp, funny, brutally observant, and impossible to manipulate. She drank coffee black, drove an ancient blue pickup with a cracked vinyl seat, and could tell by ear whether a boat engine was running rich before the owner even tied off at the dock. She used to say machinery and people were the same in one important way. When something sounded wrong, it usually was. The morning she died, the ICU nurse touched my shoulder, and I knew before she opened her mouth. Miss Ellie had been in and out of the hospital for 5 months. Congestive heart failure, then a fall, then pneumonia, then that cruel little surge of hope that tricks you into planning for next month. I had been sleeping in that narrow hospital recliner with my boots still on because I kept thinking if I left, even for a proper shower, the universe would use that gap to take her from me. It did anyway. I signed the release papers with a hand that didn't feel attached to my body. My phone buzzed while I was still at the desk. Mom, not Dana Mercer. Not a number I didn't recognize. MOM? Because I had never bothered to change the label after all these years. Maybe because a part of me liked seeing how wrong the word looked every time it lit up. The message was simple. I heard about Grandma. We're devastated. Call me right away. We need to discuss arrangements and her affairs. Her affairs. Not are you okay? Not did she suffer? Not do you need anything? Her affairs. I stared at that screen until the nurse at the desk asked if I needed water. I laughed once, dry and ugly, and said, No. Just seems grief travels fast when there might be property attached. By 7:30, I was at Halpern Funeral Home, choosing flowers Miss Ellie would have rolled her eyes at, and a casket she would have called too shiny for a working woman. Mr. Halpern showed me the folder she'd prepared months earlier. Paid in full. Hymn selected. Pastor optional. Burial dress rejected. She wanted to be buried in her dark green church suit because, in her words, if I'm going to be stared at one last time, I'd rather look expensive. I cried for the first time then, not loudly. Just one breath that cracked down the middle and left me shaking in front of a man pretending not to notice. When I stepped outside, the wind smelled like salt and gasoline from the marina. I called the only person I wanted near me. Nolan picked up on the second ring. Tell me she didn't. She did. He was silent for 2 seconds. Then, I'm on my way. Nolan Reeves had been my friend since I was 17 and my boyfriend since 19, though the word boyfriend always sounded too flimsy for what he was. He was a welder at the shipyard, broad-shouldered, patient, and allergic to dramatics unless someone hurt me. Then he became very interested in dramatics. My phone buzzed again before he got there. This time it was an email from Graham Pike, my grandmother's attorney. Ivy, I am very sorry for your loss. Your grandmother left clear instructions regarding her estate. Please contact my office after the burial. There is also a sealed personal letter addressed only to you. A letter. I read that sentence 3 times. Over the last few months, when Miss Ellie's breathing grew shallow and the pain meds made time slide sideways, she would squeeze my wrist and say things like, You listen to me, baby. I have not spent 6 years teaching you how to survive, just so those people can come strip the walls after I'm gone. I thought she was talking from anger. Turns out she had been talking from preparation. By noon, I did something people said I shouldn't do. I went to work. Not because I was heartless, because grief with nowhere to go becomes panic inside me, and engines have always been easier than feelings. At Mercer Marine Repair, though, the Mercer in the name had belonged to my grandmother's late husband, not my father. I pulled a cylinder head off a diesel block and lost myself in bolts, gaskets, Fuel lines, torque spec. The shop smelled like heat, metal, and old oil. A radio in the corner played classic rock low enough not to offend anybody. My apprentice, a 19-year-old named Tasha, took one look at my face and stopped talking. "You should be home," she said gently. "If I'm home, I'm trapped with my phone." She nodded like that made perfect sense. "Want me to screen calls? Only if you're authorized to tell blood relatives to go to hell." A tiny smile. "Emotionally? Yes. Legally? Probably not." At 2:18 p.m., my mother called. At 2:21, my father. At 2:27, my younger brother. That last one unsettled me more than the others. Caleb Mercer and I had not had a real conversation in 6 years. But unlike our parents, he was not dead to me. He had been 9 when they sent me away. Old enough to understand that I was gone. Too young to stop it. In the years after, he became the polished child they always wanted. Debate team, honors track, leadership camp. The kind of teenager who apologized to waiters, even when the waiter bumped into him. Whether that came from his own nature, or from watching what happened to me, I never knew. I let his call ring out too. Because before I tell you what happened at the funeral, I need to explain how a 15-year-old girl ends up effectively exiled from her own home while everyone pretends it's a reasonable family decision. I was the older child, the inconvenient prototype. Caleb was the success story. That was the division in our house long before anyone said it aloud. My mother, Dana, was a regional marketing director for a hospital chain. Perfect hair, perfect posture, perfect teeth, perfect instinct for which version of any story made her look the best. My father, Victor Mercer, ran commercial insurance accounts and treated life like a spreadsheet where affection was an investment he expected returns on. Caleb returned straight A's and polished trophies. I returned cracked knuckles, grease under my nails, and report cards full of B's in classes I hated, and A's in anything mechanical, visual, or hands-on. I could rebuild a lawnmower before I had my learner's permit. At 12, I fixed our dryer by watching a man on YouTube and borrowing tools from Mrs. Cardenas next door. My father called it cute. My mother called it a phase. When Caleb started piano lessons, they drove 40 minutes twice a week and paid for a teacher from New Orleans who smelled like rose perfume and talked about discipline like it was a religion. When I asked to attend a marine engine workshop at the vocational center 5 miles away, my father said, "Let's not lock you into small thinking." Small thinking. I can still hear it. At 13, I won a regional skills competition for rebuilding a carburetor in under 20 minutes. My teacher shook my mother's hand and told her, "Your daughter has unusual aptitude. There's real scholarship potential if she follows this path." My mother smiled the way people smile before declining a bad bottle of wine. "We're keeping her options open." What she meant was this. Caleb's gifts made sense to them. Mine embarrassed them. They wanted college brochures and recital programs. I wanted socket sets and shop manuals. Caleb looked like a promise they could brag about. I looked like a detour. None of that would have broken us by itself. Families survive favoritism all the time. What destroyed us was that they needed one child to embody their ambitions and the other to absorb their disappointment. By the time I was 15, I had been assigned the second role so thoroughly that even when I did nothing wrong, I somehow ended up carrying the emotional bill. If Caleb forgot homework, the house was stressful because I had started an argument 2 days earlier. If my father lost a client, my attitude at dinner became part of a larger concern about my maturity. If my mother snapped at everyone after work, she later announced she was exhausted from managing Ivy. That is how scapegoating works when it wears expensive clothes. It doesn't come at you screaming every day. It settles into the wallpaper until everybody starts calling it normal. Miss Ellie saw it before I had language for it. She lived across town then, still running the bait and parts counter herself. I spent Saturdays with her because she never asked me to be more ladylike, quieter, softer, cleaner, or more impressive. If I wanted to help her carry impellers and prop hubs from the storage shed, she handed me the box and told me not to drop it on my foot. If I wanted to sit at the workbench and take apart a C's starter motor, she slid over a tray and said, "Lay the bolts in order or future. You will curse present. You." One afternoon when I was 14, after my mother had spent an entire drive home praising Caleb's piano competition placement and asking why I couldn't commit to excellence in a way that reflected well on the family, Miss Ellie looked at me over her coffee and asked, "What did you do this time?" I shrugged. "Existed wrong, probably." She stared for a long moment, then said very quietly, "No child should learn that sentence that young." I looked away because suddenly the room felt too bright. She never mocked my interests. She never translated them into hobby language to make them easier for other people to dismiss. She called my skill what it was, skill. She called work, work. She called talent, talent. She called cruelty, cruelty. That last one would change my life. The final break came in August, 3 weeks before my sophomore year started. My parents hosted one of their backyard dinners for my father's clients and their spouses. Everything had to look curated. Lanterns in the trees, catered seafood, Caleb in a collared shirt, already trained to ask adults about their travel plans. Me in a dress my mother bought because, quote, "For once I need you not to look like you were raised in a machine shop." Halfway through the evening, one of the guests, a boat owner named Mr. Lennox, mentioned his sport fishing engine had been flooding, and nobody at the marina could figure out why. Without thinking, I said it sounded like a sticking needle valve or trash in the carb bowl. He laughed and asked how I knew that. Before I could answer, my father cut in with a little chuckle. "Ivy collects random mechanical trivia. Don't encourage her." Mr. Lennox asked another question anyway. I answered. He seemed impressed. My father's smile hardened. Later that night, after the guests left, he came into my room holding an empty bourbon glass and said, "When adults are talking business, you don't jump in." I wasn't jumping in. I knew what he was describing. "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" "The point is you made me look like I can't control my own daughter." There it was. Not rude, not wrong, not embarrassing, uncontrolled. I said, "Maybe the problem is that you'd rather sound important than listen." He slapped my desk so hard the lamp jumped. "You see? This is exactly why nobody can live with you. Nobody can live with you." My mother appeared at the door 10 minutes later, not to calm things down, but to conclude them. "Pack a bag," she said. I thought she meant for a weekend at Miss Ellie's until I saw the suitcase already open on the bed. "You're sending me away over an argument?" She crossed her arms. "We have reached a point where this household cannot function with your hostility." "My hostility? You are constantly oppositional, disrespectful, and disruptive. Caleb deserves a stable environment. Your father needs peace. I need peace. What about me?" Her expression flattened in a way I have never forgotten. "What about you?" My father stood in the hall behind her, saying nothing, which somehow made him worse. I asked the question that still burns when I remember it. "If Caleb talked to you like this, would you send him away?" Silence answered first. Then my mother said, "Caleb wouldn't." That was it. That was the whole family philosophy in 2 words. Caleb wouldn't. You're not him. You never were. You are the problem because he is the standard. Miss Ellie arrived 23 minutes later because my mother called her and framed it as a temporary cooling-off arrangement. I know exactly how she framed it because she used her crisis voice, the one designed to make cruelty sound managerial. "Eleanor, we need a little help with Ivy. Things have become volatile." Volatile. I had never been arrested, suspended, intoxicated, pregnant, violent, or even particularly reckless. I had a smart mouth and no respect left for hypocrisy. In our house that qualified as dangerous. Miss Ellie walked in, saw the suitcase, saw my face, and understood instantly. "What happened?" she asked. My mother answered first. "We need some space." Miss Ellie turned to my father. "From your daughter?" He looked at the floor. That told her everything. She picked up my suitcase. Then she took my hand. Before we reached the door, my mother said the sentence that split my life into before and after. "Maybe now Caleb can finally thrive without all this chaos in the house. Not all this tension. Not all this conflict. All this chaos. Meaning me." Miss Ellie stopped but did not turn around. "Dana," she said in a voice like cold iron, "one day you are going to understand the price of confusing convenience with love." Then she walked me out. I did not cry in the truck. I was too stunned. The air conditioner barely worked. Her old windshield wipers squeaked even though it wasn't raining. She drove with both hands on the wheel and let me sit in silence until we crossed the bridge out of town. Finally, she said, "You can stay with me as long as you need." "How long is that?" "As long as it takes for somebody in that house to grow a soul." That made me laugh so hard I started crying at the same time. Temporary became permanent in the way tragedies often do, not with one big declaration, but with repeated failures that pile into truth. My parents did not come for me the next weekend, or the next month, or Thanksgiving. At Christmas, my mother mailed a gift card and a note that said, "Hope you're making productive choices." My father sent nothing. Caleb called twice the first year, and both times sounded like he had stepped outside to do something forbidden. He asked how I was. He said he missed me. He said Mom was waiting for me to apologize so we could move forward. I asked what exactly I was apologizing for. He had no answer. By year 2, the calls stopped. Miss Ellie never lied to me. She never said they would come around. She never promised people become decent just because time passes. What she did instead was build me a life solid enough that their absence stopped being the center of it. She got me enrolled in the county vocational track. She made space for a workbench in the shed. She introduced me to every marina owner, charter captain, and mechanic who owed her a favor. She corrected my torque sequence once and made me repeat it 3 times because Confidence without precision is just expensive stupidity. She paid me for real work, not petty chores. When I turned 16, she let me rebuild a ruined outboard block from salvage just to see if I could bring it back. I could. That engine ran rough for the first 3 minutes, smoothed out on the fourth, and I think something in me smoothed out with it. By 17, Zuzuzu every single enough paid jobs through the marina that I had my own money. By 18, I had certifications. By 19, people who had once asked, "Are you sure you know what you're doing, sweetheart?" started asking if I was taking new clients. By 20, Miss Ellie quietly transferred operational control of the shop to me because her knees were failing and her heart was getting worse. She never used words like rescue or sacrifice. If anyone praised her for taking me in, she would say, "I didn't take in a stray. I took in my granddaughter. The rest of y'all are just confused." That was her version of tenderness. So when the funeral started at 4 on Friday afternoon and my parents walked in wearing expressions like they had been personally wronged by death, I had already had 6 years to understand them. The chapel in Bayhaven was small, all cream walls and polished wood, smelling of lilies and air freshener that almost covered the scent of rain-damp coats. Miss Ellie's casket stood at the front beneath a photo I chose of her leaning against the shop counter with a grease mark on one wrist and a grin that looked like she knew 3 things you didn't. Nolan stood beside me. Tasha came. Half the marina came. Mr. Dobbins from the fuel dock came in his cleanest cap. Even the retired charter captains who hated funerals showed up because Miss Ellie had once helped them all out of one disaster or another. My parents arrived 18 minutes late. My mother entered first, carrying grief on her face the way some women carry designer sunglasses, deliberately, to be seen. My father followed, taller than I remembered, grayer too, with that same banker stiffness in his neck. Caleb came behind them in a navy blazer, suddenly taller than both of us in memory. He looked straight at me once and then away. My mother opened her arms as if 6 years could be erased by choreography. "Eve." I stepped back. The emptiness between us was cleaner than any scream. She lowered her arms slowly. "We came as soon as we could," I said. "Interesting. You never found Bayhaven when she was alive." A few heads turned. Nolan's hand moved to the center of my back, but he did not interrupt. My father leaned in. "Not here." "You're right," I said. "Here would require sincerity." He inhaled hard through his nose, the way he used to before scolding me in front of guests. But Miss Ellie was 30 feet away in a polished casket, and I was not 15 anymore, so his authority just bounced off me and died. They took seats in the second row. Caleb remained standing for half a second longer, as if he wanted to say something. Then he sat too. The service passed in fragments. The pastor read scripture Miss Ellie would have tolerated for the sake of tradition. Mr. Dobbins told a story about her once chasing a man off the dock with a gaff hook because he tried to shortchange a teenage deckhand. People laughed through tears. I stood up last because I knew if I started too soon, I wouldn't finish. I talked about her hands, how they were never still, how they smelled like dish soap, motor oil, coffee, and peppermint gum, how she could make a stranger feel welcome and a liar feel naked in the same sentence, how she taught me that being useful is not the same as being exploited, and love is not the same as being chosen when convenient. At that last line, I did look at my parents. My mother's mouth tightened. My father stared straight ahead. Caleb looked down. After the burial, the real performance began. The cemetery sat on a rise above the marsh where the wind never stopped. People hugged me, pressed casseroles onto me, told me to call if I needed anything. The crowd thinned. Nolan loaded flowers into the truck bed. The pastor left. Mr. Halpern shook my hand and drove off. That was when my father approached, coat buttoned, expression measured. "We need to discuss your grandmother's estate before this gets messy. There are sentences so shameless they clear your grief for a second just to make room for disbelief." I laughed. "You couldn't wait until the dirt settled?" My mother joined him, heels sinking slightly in the damp grass. "Don't be dramatic. We're trying to handle this appropriately." Appropriately would have been visiting her before she died. We sent cards. You sent orchids with a printed sympathy quote when she was hospitalized. She hated orchids. My father cut in. "Ivy, enough. Legally, I am her next of kin." I stared at him. "No. Legally, you're her son. Morally, you're a man who let his wife throw his daughter away and now wants to inherit from the woman who cleaned up after him." His face changed then. Not hurt. Anger. Anger was always easier for him than shame. My mother stepped closer, lowering her voice into the intimate venom she reserved for private humiliation. "Whatever resentment you're nursing, this is bigger than you. Your grandmother had assets she was not in a condition to manage responsibly toward the end. That landed exactly how she intended. Not in a condition. Meaning vulnerable. Meaning manipulable. Meaning me." Nolan moved before I did. He took one quiet step forward, not touching anyone, just existing large enough to interrupt the line of attack. I said, "Be very careful." "With what?" my mother asked sweetly. "With implying the woman who practically ran this town from a folding chair and an oxygen tank didn't know her own mind." Caleb finally spoke. "Mom, not here." She ignored him. "You've been living in her house, running her business, isolating her from family." "I did not isolate her from family. Family isolated themselves. We're still her family." "No," I said, and my own voice surprised me with how calm it was. "You're people who share DNA and smell money." That should have been the end of it. It would have been, if greed didn't always believe one more push might work. My father said, "Whatever she promised you in sentiment, the law is the law." I stepped closer, so only they could hear me. "Then I guess you should pray the law loves you more than she did." I got into the truck. Nolan got in beside me. As I pulled away, I saw Caleb standing by the headstone while my parents argued with each other in stiff, furious gestures. He didn't follow them right away. That detail stayed with me. That night I sat at Miss Ellie's kitchen table with a plate of untouched food Nolan had made, and 3 unread messages from my mother. The first demanded a copy of the will. The second suggested we handle things privately, to avoid unnecessary ugliness. The third finally showed its face. "Your father is under enormous financial pressure. Don't make this harder than it has to be." There it was. Not grief, not reconciliation, debt. I blocked her number after reading that line. Then Caleb sent a text from an unknown number. "I'm sorry about today. I didn't know they were going to do that at the cemetery." I stared at the screen for a long time before writing back. "You didn't stop them." The reply came 2 minutes later. "I know." I set the phone down. Not because I was done thinking about him, because I wasn't. 3 days later we sat in Graham Pike's office, and the scene from the beginning of this story finally happened. His firm occupied a brick building above a pharmacy on Main Street. The waiting room smelled like lemon polish and paper. Inside his office, the air conditioner rattled like it had grievances of its own. I sat on one side of the conference table with Nolan beside me, and a legal pad in front of me I had no intention of using. Across from us sat my parents and Caleb. My mother had dressed for battle. Ivory blouse, pearl earrings, expensive watch, grief toned down into credibility. My father had a banker's face on, as if this were a negotiation he could close by refusing to blink. Caleb looked like he hadn't slept. Graham Pike entered with 2 folders, a sealed envelope, and the kind of neutrality people develop after decades of watching families reveal themselves under fluorescent lighting. "Before we begin," he said, "I want it noted that Mrs. Eleanor Vale revised and executed her final will 7 months ago while fully competent. I have physician certification, witness affidavits, and contemporaneous video. If any party is here intending to challenge capacity, you should understand that issue has been thoroughly anticipated." He looked directly at my father on the last sentence. My mother smiled thinly. "No one wants conflict, Mr. Pike. We just want clarity. Then let us provide it." He opened the folder and began reading. Eleanor Jean Vale left her residence on Harbor Street, her ownership interest in Vale Marine Repair, the attached inventory, the adjoining lot, her savings and investment accounts, and her pickup truck to me. Solely to me. Every line landed with the strange force of both shock and recognition. Miss Ellie had warned me she was putting her house in order, but hearing the legal language made it real in a way private warnings never had. Then Graham Pike read the final provision. "To my daughter Dana Mercer and my son-in-law, Victor Mercer, I leave nothing." My mother's head snapped up. "Excuse me?" He continued, unbothered. "To my grandson Caleb Mercer, I leave the enclosed letter and the contents of the cedar box labeled, 'For when you decide who you are,' to be delivered only upon his personal request and only without his parents present." Caleb went still. Then Graham Pike reached the codicil. "In the event my daughter or son-in-law contest this will, all records held in sealed file B, including financial ledgers, transferred funds, emails, and a sworn statement regarding requested coercion, shall be entered into proceedings without limitation." My father's voice went flat. "Requested coercion?" Graham folded his hands. "Your mother was quite specific." My mother laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "This is absurd." Graham looked at her over his glasses. "Mrs. Mercer, absurd is an emotional category. Probate is a legal one." That was when she said the line from the opening. How does a girl we fed, clothed, and tolerated somehow convince my mother to leave her everything? Tolerated. I should thank her for that word. It removed the last splinter of guilt I didn't know I still had. Before I could answer, Graham turned his laptop around. Mrs. Vale anticipated questions of influence. She recorded a statement. He pressed play. Miss Ellie appeared on the screen in her green recliner, a cardigan over her shoulders, oxygen tubing under her nose, eyes bright as broken glass. She looked thinner than I wanted to remember, but there was nothing weak about her. "If Dana is hearing this," she began, "then let me save everyone some time." "No," Ivy did not trick me. No, I was not confused. No, I did not accidentally forget my own daughter in my will. I left my estate to the person who showed up. She paused to sip water, then continued. Ivy did my books when my eyes got bad. She took me to cardiology. She slept on a hospital chair that should be illegal. She kept the shop running while still having the manners, not to mention that half the men who doubted her now ask for her by name. She earned every inch of what I gave her. My father shifted in his seat. My mother's face hardened until it seemed carved. Then Miss Ellie leaned toward the camera. As for my daughter and her husband, let the record show this. 4 years ago, Dana asked me for a loan to help cover tuition, competition, travel, and a private consultant for Caleb because investing in excellence is expensive. I gave it. A year later, Victor asked again, this time to cover debts against their house. I gave that too. When they asked a third time, I said no. 2 weeks later, Dana suggested I sign a durable power of attorney putting my assets under Victor's supervision because I was, quote, getting forgetful. I was not forgetful. I was inconvenient. My mother actually stood up. This is outrageous. Graham did not pause the video. Miss Ellie went on. I kept every email. I kept the draft document they wanted me to sign. I kept notes. Not because I enjoy paperwork, though I do, but because greedy people always think older women can be steamrolled if you call it concern. Nolan looked at me once, and in that glance I realized something terrible and clean. My parents hadn't just come for whatever my grandmother left after death. They had tried to get it before she died. The video wasn't finished. If Caleb is watching this someday, sweetheart, hear me carefully. This is not your fault. You were a child in a house run by image and fear. If you want to know who your sister really is, ask why the hardest working person in your family was the only one they sent away. Then she smiled, tired but wicked. And Victor, if you're still pretending to be the adult in the room, remember this. A man who watches his daughter be exiled to preserve dinner table peace does not get to lecture anyone about family. The screen went black. Nobody moved for 3 full seconds. Then my father sat down very slowly, as if gravity had suddenly increased. My mother spoke first. She was manipulated at the end. Graham opened the second folder. Mrs. Mercer, File B contains your emails requesting financial access, the unsigned power of attorney, a memo from Mrs. Vale documenting the conversation in which you proposed selling the Harbor Street property, while allowing her to remain there, for appearances, and bank records showing substantial transfers to your household over several years. My father turned toward my mother. You told me she destroyed that draft. My mother's head whipped toward him, because she said she would. There it was, the first crack where blame started searching for a new host. Graham continued with the coolness of a man reading weather data. Additionally, Mrs. Vale left a handwritten statement regarding Ivy Mercer's removal from your home at age 15, along with school registration documents, medical consent forms, and tax records indicating you did not claim her as a dependent after that year. My father looked at him sharply. What does that have to do with probate? It matters because Mrs. Vale explicitly framed her bequests as going to the family member who assumed responsibility when the legal parents chose not to. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Not because I was afraid, because someone had finally documented what happened to me in language no one could gaslight. My mother sat back down and changed tactics so fast it almost impressed me. Ivy, she said softly, turning toward me with sudden wet-eyed sincerity. Whatever happened between us. You know, families say things in hard seasons. We all made mistakes. But this level of punishment is not what your grandmother would have wanted if she understood how much pain it would cause. That was classic Dana Mercer. If dominance failed, sentiment arrived dressed as compromise. I said, she understood pain very well. She just finally assigned it to the right people. My father rubbed his temples. How much is the estate worth? Graham gave him a look of open distaste, which told me the meeting had crossed even his professional threshold. Substantial enough that challenging this without evidence would be reckless. How substantial? Graham answered anyway. The house, the lot, the business inventory, the liquid accounts, and the truck together made up an estate worth far more than I had allowed myself to imagine. Not billionaire money, not fantasy money, but enough to secure the shop, repair the roof, expand operations, pay every debt, and breathe, for the first time in my adult life. My mother inhaled sharply. My father went pale. Caleb shut his eyes. Then he surprised everyone. Can I have the letter? He asked. Graham nodded, took the sealed envelope marked Caleb, and slid it across the table. My mother reached for it automatically. Let me see. Caleb put his hand over it before she touched it. No. That one syllable changed the room. She blinked at him. Excuse me? She said I get it without you present. I heard him. You don't talk to me like that. He met her eyes, and for the first time, I saw not the little brother who used to stand on a piano bench, but a 19-year-old man who had spent years swallowing things until he ran out of room. Then maybe, don't make every sentence a test, my father snapped. Caleb. But Caleb had already stood up, letter in hand. Graham, who had apparently waited all morning for a moral backbone to appear, said, Mr. Mercer, your grandmother's instructions are clear. If Caleb wishes, he may read that letter now in a separate office. Caleb looked at me then just once. Not asking permission. Maybe asking whether it was too late to become someone else. I gave the smallest nod. He left with Graham. The silence he left behind was different from the earlier one. Not shock now. Recalculation. My mother rounded on my father in a hiss. You told me this would be simple. He stared at her. I told you not to push her at the cemetery. You let that old woman poison everything. I poisoned it, he shot back. You're the one who kept pushing for power of attorney. For us, for this family. No, he said. And I will never forget the disgust in his voice, because it was too late to matter but real enough to wound. For the life you wanted everyone else to finance. My mother went still, then furious. Don't you dare make me the villain when you were perfectly happy spending the money. Nolan's hand tightened around his coffee cup. I knew he was 5 seconds from enjoying himself too much, so I touched his sleeve once and he stayed put. I watched my parents tear at each other in front of me, and felt something stranger than victory. Absence. The old hunger to be defended, chosen, regretted, avenged, was just not there the way I thought it would be. Maybe because Miss Ellie had spent years filling those hollow places with practical things. Rent receipts, work orders, good tools, food in the fridge, competence, routine. By the time my parents collapsed in front of me, there wasn't enough emptiness left for them to own. Graham returned with Caleb 10 minutes later. His eyes were red. He sat down, placed the envelope in front of him, and said very carefully, I won't contest anything. My mother turned toward him as if struck. There is nothing for you to contest. We're discussing family assets. He looked at her with a kind of tired clarity I recognized instantly because I had worn it at 15. No, you are. Then he turned to me. She said she kept a box for me, he said. I want it. That's all. Graham nodded. It's available whenever you choose to collect it. My father asked. What did the letter say? Caleb's laugh was short and painful. You don't get to know. That hit my mother harder than anything else had. Control, once lost, never leaves quietly. She stood up again, grabbed her purse, and looked at me with naked resentment. Do you feel proud? Sitting there while an old woman rewards your bitterness? I answered no. I feel believed. Something flickered in her face then. Not remorse. Recognition. She understood exactly why that word mattered. That made it better. My father rose more slowly. He looked 20 years older than when he entered the room. For a moment I thought he might apologize. Not because I believed in miracles, but because some men confuse collapse with honesty and say startling things in the blast radius. Instead he said, You could still help us, Ivy. There it was. The center of him. Need-wearing regrets coat. I said, Help yourselves. He stared, as if maybe I had spoken another language. Then he followed my mother out. Caleb remained seated. When the door shut behind them, the room exhaled. Graham gathered papers, left copies for me, and stepped out to allow privacy, which I respected more than almost anything he had done that day. That left me, Nolan, and the brother I had lost without ever burying. Caleb didn't look at me at first. He turned the envelope over in his hands and said, She knew. About what? More than I thought. He handed me the letter. Read the last paragraph. I hesitated. It's yours. She wanted you to see it. The letter was written in Miss Ellie's sharp, slanted hand. Caleb, if you're reading this, then one of two things happened. Either you finally got curious enough to walk out from under your parents' version of the world, or they dragged you here expecting you to help them finish what they started. I hope it's the first. You were easier for them to love because you were useful to their story. That is not praise. It is a warning. Your sister was not cast out because she was bad. She was cast out because she saw too clearly and refused to bend in flattering ways. If you want a future that doesn't smell like cowardice, go find her before your parents teach you to confuse comfort with character. The cedar box is yours when you're ready. And for the love of God, stop letting your mother pick your ties. You dress like a junior senator at his first indictment. I snorted despite myself. Caleb actually laughed through his tears. That was the first crack between us that didn't hurt. What's in the box? I asked. He swallowed. Photos, letters, stuff from when we were kids, I think. Graham said she put it together over years. My chest tightened. Miss Ellie, of course, had archived even the parts of the family she couldn't fix. Caleb finally looked at me. I'm sorry. People say those words all the time. Most of the time they ask to be let off the hook by saying them. Caleb said them like he had no idea what they could possibly repair, only that not saying them would be another failure. I know you were a kid, I said. I was. But I got older. I could have looked for you sooner. Yes. He flinched, but I didn't soften it. Truth without softness was still kinder than lies. Nolan stood. I'm going to get terrible coffee so you two can decide if you're having a reunion or a hostage negotiation. When he left, Caleb laughed once and wiped his face. I deserve that. Probably. He nodded. Mom and Dad are in trouble, I guessed. He gave a bitter smile. You know that college consulting company, the summer programs, the private coaching, all that? None of it was paid from bonuses. They refinanced the house twice. Dad took loans against future commissions. Mom kept saying one breakthrough would pay it all back. Then Dad lost 2 major clients last year. They've been drowning. And Grandma was supposed to be the raft. He looked sick. I didn't know about the power of attorney thing. I believe you. She told me Grandma was getting forgetful. Your mother thinks aging is a loophole. He rubbed a hand over his face. The letter said I need to decide who I am before their panic decides for me. That sounds like her. He nodded, then met my eyes directly. I don't want money from you. Good. Because pity has a smell, and I didn't want it in that room. What do you want? He took a breath. A chance. Not today. Not because Grandma died. Just later, if that's possible. I thought about the years between us. About the child he had been. About the man he might still become. About how easy it would be to punish him for being the loved one, even though he had never asked for the role. Miss Ellie had once told me bitterness is attractive because it feels like power until you realize it's just unpaid rent to the people who hurt you. So I said, one chance. Small. You earn the rest. His eyes filled again. That's fair. Also, I added, if you show up acting like an emissary from them, I will throw you off my dock. A wet laugh. Also fair. The next month should have been peaceful. Legally, the estate transferred cleanly. Operationally, the shop stayed open because I kept it open. Emotionally, nothing about grief is clean, but work helped. I repainted the office trim, replaced a failing compressor, renegotiated a supply account, and found a rotten section of roof over the storage room that Miss Ellie had definitely known about and definitely chosen not to fix, just to see whether I would catch it. I did. At night, though, the house sounded different without her. No cough from the hallway. No muttered cursing at crossword clues. No late kettle whistle. I would reach for my phone to text her some dumb thing about a customer, and then remember. That was the real inheritance, I think. Not the property, not the accounts. The empty places she had earned. My parents did not contest the will. That part surprises people when I tell them. They expect a courtroom. A dramatic legal war. But greed depends on odds, and once Graham Pike showed them File B, the odds were ugly. Worse, contesting the will meant risking public records, discovery, depositions, and whatever story my mother had been telling herself for 6 years, suddenly becoming searchable. Image-conscious people can survive shame in private. They rarely volunteer for documented humiliation. So they pivoted. My father emailed first. Subject: we need to resolve this as family. The email contained 4 paragraphs. The first was apology-flavored. The second blamed stress. The third explained their financial exposure in vague but alarming terms. The fourth asked whether I would consider either a low-interest private loan or temporary participation in the Harbor Street property through a family trust structure that Victor could help manage. I laughed so hard I choked on my coffee. A week later, my mother switched tactics and mailed a handwritten note because she knew handwriting can simulate intimacy when sincerity is unavailable. Ivy, I know emotions are high, and old hurts feel close right now, but holding on to resentment won't bring healing. Your father is struggling more than you realize, and despite everything, you are still part of this family. Families do not let one another drown. Love, Mom. Love, Mom. It might have been the most manipulative 2-word signature I had ever seen. I burned the note over the sink and watched the edge curl black. Caleb came alone for the Cedar Box 2 Saturdays later. He drove down from Baton Rouge, where he was finishing a policy internship that now sounded less impressive to me than suspiciously adjacent to the kind of life my parents wanted him to perform. He looked less polished this time. No blazer. No tie selected by a crisis manager posing as a mother. Just jeans, a wrinkled button-down, and exhaustion. Graham had the box sent over to the house at my request because Miss Ellie would have preferred anything important happen at her kitchen table. The box was small, cedar-lined, heavier than it looked. Caleb sat across from me while Nolan pretended not to eavesdrop from the porch, which only meant he eavesdropped with respect. Inside were photographs, report cards, drawings, postcards, and little dated envelopes. One envelope contained 2 wristbands from an aquarium trip when I was 10 and Caleb was 4. Another held a newspaper clipping about Caleb winning a junior speech contest. Another contained a sketch I had made at 11 of Miss Ellie's truck with absurdly huge tires. There was a note attached to it in her handwriting. Ivy did this while waiting for her mother, who was 40 minutes late and never apologized. Keep proof of what children notice. Caleb read that note twice. There were copies of birthday cards, school play programs, a photo of both of us asleep in the back seat of Miss Ellie's truck, my head knocked sideways against the window, Caleb drooling on my shoulder, and at the bottom there was one final envelope labeled, "For the day you stop believing the house story." Inside was a typed timeline. Every incident Miss Ellie had witnessed or documented. Dates I had stayed overnight because things were tense. Dates my mother canceled pickups. The August night I was sent away. The year they stopped claiming me on taxes. The year Caleb's expensive prep programs began. A short note at the bottom. Children are not removed from a home to preserve peace. They are removed to preserve somebody's preferred order. Learn the difference before you build a life around the lie. Caleb sat very still after reading that. I think, he said finally, voice raw. I always knew some version of this. Knowing in your body and admitting it in your mind are different things. He nodded. Mom always said you abandoned us because you were difficult. I smiled without humor. That's convenient. Makes them the wounded ones. He looked up. Did you ever hate me? The truthful answer mattered. No, I said. I envied you. I resented what they were willing to give you. I hated the role you got cast in, but I never hated you. He closed his eyes for a second like he had been bracing for impact and got air instead. That day didn't fix us. People love that kind of ending because it compresses pain into content. Real life doesn't. But it started something honest. Caleb began calling every week. Not long calls, just real ones. He told me he was applying to law schools and maybe, for the first time, asking himself whether that was his dream or an inherited costume. I told him he'd make an excellent lawyer if he only used his powers for evil against deserving people. He laughed more each call. He also started saying no to our parents, which had immediate consequences. 3 months after probate, my mother came to Bayhaven unannounced, not to apologize, not to visit Caleb, not even to scope out the property discreetly. She came because creditors had begun circling, and panic had burned away the last layers of presentation. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was in the shop replacing a turbo when Tasha glanced out the bay door and muttered, "You've got a storm in pearls." Dana Mercer stood in the doorway wearing beige linen and desperation. I wiped my hands slowly and walked out. "We're closed for emotional extortion," I said. She did not smile. "I need 5 minutes. You used up 6 years. Eve." "No. Whatever script you brought, skip to the part with the dollar amount." Her nostrils flared. She hated vulgarity when spoken plainly, because it denied her the luxury of calling greed concern. "We are under temporary pressure," she said. "Your father's situation is more serious than he admitted. There it is." She glanced around the shop, taking in the organized shelves, the labeled bins, the men waiting by their boats, Tasha pretending to sort invoices while listening with both ears. "Could we do this somewhere private?" "No. Privacy is where you do your best lying." Her face changed. The mask slipped, and for 1 second I saw the real thing underneath. Not maternal sorrow, not loving frustration, but fury that I still would not return to the script. "We invested everything in this family," she said. "Everything. You have no idea what it costs to keep people moving upward. Maybe because I was the part you cut loose when the budget got tight. That is not what happened. It is exactly what happened. You were impossible. Because I answered back? Because every room became about your defiance." I took 1 step closer. "No. Every room became about your embarrassment that I wasn't easy to market." She stared at me. In the silence behind us, I could hear an impact wrench from the next bay and gulls outside over the marina. Then she played her last card. "If we lose the house," she said quietly, "your brother loses everything too." That was the first truly skillful move she made. Use Caleb. Use the one remaining moral thread. Unfortunately for her, she didn't know about the weekly calls. "Caleb already moved out," I said. This time her composure shattered. "He what?" "He signed a lease with 2 friends near campus 3 weeks ago." She looked genuinely stunned, which meant he hadn't told her, which meant he finally understood that survival sometimes begins with withholding access. He would not. He did. She swayed just slightly, catching herself on the counter edge. "He can't leave us to deal with this alone." I almost laughed at the phrasing, "us," as if children are emergency assets. "You taught both of your kids something," I said. "You just don't like the lesson." Her eyes filled then, but not elegantly. Anger tears, not sorrow tears. "After all I did for you." That line. That ancient invoice parents issue when they want payment for basics. I said, You fed a child you chose to have and called it sacrifice. Miss Ellie loved a child you discarded and called it Tuesday. Her face emptied out. That, more than rage, ended the scene. Some fights stop because someone wins. Some stop because one person realizes the old leverage is gone forever. She left without another word. That evening, Caleb called. She came there, didn't she? She did. She's telling everyone I've been manipulated by you. Nice to know I remain powerful. He made a strangled noise that turned into laughter. Then he went quiet. I told Dad I'm not giving them my internship money anymore. How'd that go? He asked me whether I planned to watch my family collapse. I leaned back against the porch rail, looking out at the dark line of the water. And I asked him why he was comfortable watching his daughter disappear. I closed my eyes. Miss Ellie should have been alive to hear that. Winter came hard that year. Not snow hard. Gulf winters don't usually bother with the postcard version, but wet and bone-deep and gray. Business slowed, then surged after a January storm chewed up 3 docks and filled half the town's lower engines with bad water. I barely slept for 2 weeks. Grief got folded into labor the way grief often does in working places. You mourn between invoices. You cry in the truck and then quote a rebuild. You see you're dead in habits more than in dreams. I caught myself saying her phrases. That bolt's not tight. It's nervous. Don't trust a cheap seal. Never buy bait from a man with clean fingernails. I missed her hardest when something funny happened, because she appreciated absurdity with almost religious devotion. On the first anniversary of the day she took me in, I found an old receipt in the kitchen junk drawer from a diner we stopped at that night. 2 meatloaf specials, 1 slice pecan pie, 1 chocolate milk. She had written on the back. Girl arrived furious. Forecast improving. I sat on the floor and cried into the junk drawer for 10 full minutes. That is when I finally understood that revenge had never been the point. People watching from the outside love the fantasy that the best ending is making bad people suffer. Sometimes it is. But suffering is unreliable. Some villains thrive inside chaos. Some never understand what they lost. Some simply shift blame until their dying breath. What mattered more was this. Miss Ellie had believed me before evidence existed. Then she left evidence anyway. She didn't just save me. She made it impossible for them to rewrite me later. And that is why the payoff came when it did. In March, Bay Haven's Chamber of Commerce gave Miss Ellie a posthumous Community Service Award. I almost declined it because she would have called the whole thing a banquet for people who like hearing themselves mention resilience. But the marina practically bullied me into attending, so I went. The event was held in the old Civic Hall downtown. String lights, folding chairs, shrimp cocktails trying to look formal. I wore a dark blue dress Nolan picked because, according to him, you deserve one night where nobody confuses competence with a uniform. Caleb came too, driving in after work. He had cut his hair shorter, lost the expensive tie habit, and looked more like himself every month. The surprise was that my father came alone. He stood near the back until the ceremony ended, then approached while people were still milling around the dessert table. He looked thinner. Not cinematic ruin thinner. Stress thinner, the kind that hollows men from the inside. I won't take much of your time, he said. I did not invite him to continue. That was intentional. He looked at the plaque in my hands. Your grandmother would have liked this more than she pretended. Probably, he nodded. Your mother and I are separating. I felt no shock. Just a slow recognition of machinery finally breaking where stress had lived for years. Okay, he swallowed. The house is gone. There it was, stripped bare at last. Bankruptcy by confession. I'm not telling you for money. He added too quickly. I know you think that. I raised an eyebrow. Do you? His shoulders dropped. I don't know what I think anymore. For the first time in my life, he sounded like a man without a script. We stood in the noise of other people's conversations while a volunteer stacked coffee cups behind us. Finally, he said, I should have stopped it. I watched him carefully. Which part? The answer mattered. He did not say the loans. He did not say the pressure. He did not say the will. He said, the night she sent you away. And for one stunned second, I was 15 again in a dress I hated with a suitcase on my bed, waiting for one parent to choose courage over comfort. He looked down. I told myself it was temporary because that made me less of a coward. Coward. Not stress. Not confusion. Not a hard season. Coward. That was the first honest word he had ever given me. It did not fix him. It did not fix us. But it made the ending truer. I know, I said. His eyes lifted to mine. I don't expect forgiveness. Good. He nodded once. A harsh little exhale like he deserved that and more. Caleb says you're doing well. I am. Another nod. I'm glad. This time I believed he meant it, and that almost hurt more than if he had lied. Because sincerity arriving after the damage is complete, has a particular cruelty to it. It proves the person always had the parts necessary to be decent. They just didn't use them in time. He glanced toward the exit. I'm leaving town next month. Houston. New job, maybe. Smaller. I said nothing. Then he asked, is there any chance years from now maybe that we don't end like this? I looked past him through the Civic Hall windows toward the dark marina lights in the distance. Toward Harbor Street. Toward the house where a woman once took a discarded girl in and turned her back into a person. I thought about what people call closure, as if it's a door somebody else can hand you. It isn't. It's a structure you build yourself from facts, limits, and whatever tenderness you refuse to let die. So I answered him with the only thing I knew was true. We already ended like this. What happens next would have to be something else. His face tightened, but he nodded because he understood. Then he left. Not redeemed, not forgiven, not triumphant, just gone. And somehow that felt right. After he walked out, Caleb came over with 2 paper cups of bad coffee and asked, was that terrible? Moderately. He handed me a cup. That's practically a holiday in this family. I laughed, real this time. Nolan joined us a minute later and slung an arm across my shoulders. On stage, some local councilman was still talking too long about community values, but I barely heard him. Because in that loud, ordinary room, with my brother choosing honesty and the man I loved warm at my side, I finally felt the full shape of what Miss Ellie had done. She had not simply left me a house and a business. She had left me position, proof, breathing room, a future that no longer depended on begging love from the people least capable of giving it. The next spring, I expanded the shop into the adjoining lot and opened a second bay dedicated to emergency charter repairs. Tasha became lead tech on smaller engines. We painted the sign a deep marine blue and kept the name Vale Marine Repair exactly as it was because some names should outlive the people who make them matter. In the office, I framed 2 things. The first was a photo of Miss Ellie sitting on an overturned bucket, laughing at something out of frame, one hand lifted like she was about to tell somebody they were full of nonsense. The second was a copy of the first page of her will where she named me plainly and without apology. Not because I needed the money memory, because I needed the sentence. I leave everything to Ivy Mercer. No qualifiers, no comparisons, no tolerated, no temporary, no because Caleb wouldn't, no because she's difficult, but just my name, chosen clean. That is the real reason my parents lost. Not because they were outmaneuvered, not because Miss Ellie kept records, not because their debts cornered them. They lost because the child they threw away survived long enough to become undeniable, and when they came back with open hands, expecting grief to soften me into old obedience, they found something they had never bothered to imagine. I was no longer asking to be let back in. I was standing in the house built after they locked the first door. If this hit home, tell me honestly, would you have left a way back for Caleb? Or shut the whole bloodline out for good?